All right, here we go. We are now live for our very first meeting for a new thing that we're trying out here related to this thing we're building called Build an Online Course with Sketchnotes. Wanted to welcome Raven and Paul joining us on the webinar today. There's one other person, Joy, who will be joining us in future weeks, but was unable to make it today because she has tickets to see The Color Purple live, the play version of it. So didn't want to pull her away from that. The what we're going to do today in this first kind of kickoff webinar, kind of like it's like week 0/week 1 of the journey that we're going to be on together here. Today's webinar will have 2 parts. The first part of the webinar is just a quick opportunity for each of us to kind of introduce ourselves, reintroduce ourselves to each other, since like Raven and Paul and I have had many of these conversations before within the verbal to visual community. So we know each other well, which is going to make this fun. But keeping in mind that, a couple of months from now, other folks who will pick up this resource, they're going to get to follow our journeys, which is hopefully going to be cool and interesting and valuable. But to get that started, we get to kind of introduce the characters of the story that we're going to be playing out here. So with that, I think I will throw it to Raven first, and you can just kind of mention, kind of already mentioned your name, but where you are in the world, kind of generally like what you're up to, how you spend your time, and maybe even like how you got into sketchnoting and like why you're interested in sketchnoting. So kind of just the higher level stuff there. So I will hand the mic over to Raven. Go for it, Raven.
Hi, cool. Hi, I'm Raven Henderson. I am tuning in from Columbus, Georgia, in the U.S. So I'm in the southern part of the states where we start shivering when it's like 60 degrees out. And I do work full-time as a manager of a fine art gallery, but I also do sketchnoting and graphic recording professionally for the Sketch Effect. I got into doing sketchnotes because partially because of a Pat Flynn broadcast where there was a visual recorder on that didn't even know the job existed. She just was looking for a way to present her resume to a friend to help her headhunt a job. And she drew out her career path, and the person was like, this is a job. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And I stumbled across Doug through, I think, YouTube videos, some kind of internet Google search. Doug came up and I took his course. And to practice, I began sketchnoting in church every Sunday because it's a chance to have a live speech delivered and to be in a room and to take notes in real time. And because it's 2018, I shared it on Instagram and Facebook, everything I created, and eventually met other people that not only do sketch notes, but that do sketch notes in church, and started community with people that do sermon sketch notes. And out of that hashtag Learn in Public of doing all of this, I was recruited by the Sketch Effect out of Atlanta, Georgia, along with other people that had been sharing their sketch notes and such online. And while we may have been doing little one-off projects here with the Sketch Effect, they set everything up for us. Sorry, my computer's doing a little funny thing because my phone is connected to my MacBook, and so like it's letting me know my phone's ringing. So now I do graphic recording. I don't know, sort of kind of as an independent contractor for the Sketch Effect. They do all the, what do you call it? The finding the jobs, the selling of the skill, and all of the coordination. And I just show up at the event and pick up my boards and do the recording and then go home, and Sketch Effect does everything else. But are we talking about why we're in this class yet, or that wasn't the thing? I feel like I've already been talking a long time.
No, it's good. Yeah. Why don't you mention that too? Kind of like why you decided to take part in this specific.
So I decided to take part in this because I've enjoyed taking Doug's online courses and enjoy the behind the scenes that he shares with us in the community of the different projects he's working on. And I was like, man, I want me some of that sweet online course money myself. So I've tried to do it several times on my own. I've talked about it inside the Verbal to Visual community. I haven't made it all the way to the finish goal yet of doing courses. So I'm excited for the accountability of being with a group of other people who are making courses as well, so that it doesn't feel like such a solo endeavor that gets muddy and it's easy to push it aside when no one else is really interested on the beginning stages of something that I'm working on.
Right on. I love it. And that's kind of one of the main reasons why like this idea of having this like small cohort of people build courses alongside each other is like so exciting to me also, both not only for the like in the moment accountability and kind of like motivation, but also for folks that are like watching this after the fact, and like the fact that they'll get to see our journey and kind of hopefully there's still that element of kind of accountability and following along with us for those that are watching this after the fact and kind of taking part in that experience as well. So thank you, Raven, for sharing your background and what you're up to. It's kind of a cool combination there. Got the day job at the art gallery, got this kind of side gig with Sketch Effect, which sounds like a great, I know of a handful of people that work for that organization. It's kind of a cool situation. It's like a collective of graphic recorders, oftentimes working together, sometimes working individually, but it's kind of cool to see what that organization is up to. And yeah, excited that you decided to join us to follow through on already. Raven's been out there building her own community within the Sermon Sketchnotes realm and has been building some resources here and there. And now we get to help her go to the finish line of getting a course out there. So thanks, Raven. Next, let's throw it to Paul. Paul, first of all, why don't you explain why it looks like you have a black screen behind you?
Well, good morning. Good morning, Doug. It is it's early in the morning here. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. It's just clicked over 4 a.m. here in Australia, and I'm excited to be part of this kind of this project. I'm actually a school chaplain, so I'm a teacher, trained teacher, an ordained minister. I often, part of my work is both as a teacher, but as a chaplain is presenting. And I've sat through a lot of sermons, a little bit like Raven was talking. And I think Mike Road, or Rhodey, was probably my introduction. I think I heard him on a podcast and was intrigued by what he was talking about, and so I went and found some of his books, and he was really my introduction to sketchnoting. And so I'm not quite sure how I found Doug, but it was verbal to visual, and that concept of a lot of what I do is speak, whether it be to a class of 20 students or an auditorium of 1,000 students. The verbal part of it is something that I do, and within that I try and have some visual impact. But for a long time I've enjoyed handwriting, and I've enjoyed kind of drawing and sketching a little bit, and then to be able to see, well, Doug combined the two for me, the verbal, the speaking part of it, but also the visual, and so that combination was the name, probably more than anything, that really intrigued me first. And then bit by bit, learning from Doug and doing some of the courses and enrolling in some of these things. And probably for me, one of the things that has been terrific is Verbal to Visual run an online chat once a week. And that has been good to, again, like Raven said, the accountability, the I guess the small progress as well. And that's something that for me has been important to keep remembering, that when other people happen to look over my shoulder at what I'm scribbling, or they see something that I've done afterwards, they appreciate it, and they have anticipated that that's a really good way of taking notes. One of the things that Mike Road talked about was, how he got into it was he was taking screeds and screeds and screeds of handwritten notes and never going back and looking at it. And for me, that was exactly what I was doing. I would go to a conference, I would go to church sometimes, and take lots and lots of notes. I've studied lots of different kind of topics and through my learning, but never go back. Kind of have this idea that, yes, I will. Yes, that's important stuff. But just, finding the bit of the nugget of information, whereas with sketch notes, I'm able to highlight it, focus on it. And actually, I quite enjoy going back to my notes now that I'm doing sketch notes. I've not done any graphic recording. I've not done anything publicly like that. But Austin Kleon wrote a book, and the title of the book is Show Your Work. And so I read that book, and really that resonated with me. And so I had that courage, a little bit like, I think Doug's got a kind of a side thing once upon a time called Practice in Public or Learn in Public. And so I shared some of my drawings, some of my sketches, and that got picked up. And, so I was able to illustrate a coloring book. And so that's pretty cool. And just recently, because I haven't shared anything for a long time other than within, say, a community like Sermon Sketch Notes, and just last week or the week before, I shared something on my normal, my own Facebook page, and it looks like that somebody's shown some interest in that, and I'm having a conversation in a week next week with a book editor, an educational publisher, and they want some of my let's call it handiwork to be included in this book. So that's pretty cool and I guess the encouragement, show your work, and yet I know that some people turn up week after week or even day after day. They're putting stuff out, and kind of it's a long road. And just a couple of things that I've shared genuinely publicly have been picked up really quickly. So and it has led to something. So whether that's right place, right time, whether there really is something in what I'm doing that is not just, like, for me, it's normal. Like, for me, it's just, well, that's how I like to look at things. And so that's how I try and create them. I don't know the reason or the explanation behind it, except that doing sketch notes helps me to stay engaged with the content. And I'm more likely to go back and look at it afterwards, which is a reason why I've continued to pursue this form of note-taking. And I love it. I enjoy it. So keep doing what you enjoy.
I love it. Thank you, Paul, for sharing that background. And what I like about what Paul brought up was the fact that, I think all of us get into sketchnoting because it's this interesting skill that we want to learn and use just for our own kind of intrinsic purposes. But as Paul mentioned, like, once you get into it and like develop your skills even just a little bit, and then start putting your work out there, seeing other people react to it and other people seeing the value in it, and then these opportunities cropping up for you to use this skill of visualizing information potentially in all sorts of different realms, which is fun to see. I feel like this comes up fairly regularly within the Verbal to Visual community, where we have these weekly webinar chats. The opportunities to use the skill you've developed and treat it as a service, maybe that you make some income off of. And I think this what we're doing here, this idea of building an online course with your sketchnoting skills, is kind of an extension of that, of using this skill in a way that creates value for other people. And it is kind of like, I was realizing, even just because I've been working on the promo video for this very course, like this week, I actually like just recorded the sketchnoted part of it this morning before jumping on to this. And yeah, just realizing we're jumping like right away into kind of the deep end in terms of like jumping right to, oh, let's build a full-fledged online course, like with your sketchnoting skills, like kind of surpassing the, yeah, do a freelance sketchnote here or there. But that's okay. I kind of like just jumping right in and seeing how it goes. Why, Paul, did you decide to take part in this specific thing that we're doing here with building an online course?
I think the notion of sharing what I know as a teacher, I suppose it's another way to share and to teach, and for other people to learn from what I've developed and what I've worked hard to kind of develop for myself, is something that I'm happy to and keen to pass on. And you know, these days, the notion of being seen by a bigger audience and the potential for that is pretty cool. Like, you know, I'm here in Australia, you guys are over in America somewhere, and just the fact that, you know, I would say that I've gotten to know you guys a little bit over the journey, and you know, that's pretty cool that even me, from a very not technical background, is able to work it, that I can talk to you in real time. Here we are, when I speak, you can hear it straight away. That's pretty amazing. I've also, you know, kind of cottoned on to the notion of, so call it passive income, if you like, call it creating something that is a resource that effectively build it once, make it once, and then potentially sell it lots and lots of times. I quite like that idea. Most of what I do is a one-off thing. If I'm giving a presentation, if I'm speaking in class, if I'm speaking to an assembly or into a church environment, you know, you do it once and it's live, and it's and however good or not it was, it's poof, and it's gone. Whereas building something that is I guess something that's held and that's clung onto, and then you can reuse it over and over again, and it can add more value, I suppose, is one of the reasons why. And that accountability and the motivation to do it, because I've thought about it for a long time. My wife has encouraged me, you could do that, and go, okay, and here was an opportunity. I thought, all right, let's give it a go, see if I really can do it. And so that's why I'm on board.
That's great. I believe that you can do it. So I'm excited that you joined us here. And to just kind of round it out, my name's Doug. I'm here in Portland, Oregon. I got into sketchnoting because of Sunny Brown's TED Talk, the short 6 minutes, Doodlers Unite. Great talk, and that kind of started me down the rabbit hole, eventually led me to Mike Rohde, and now all of the many people that are exploring sketchnoting, teaching sketchnoting. Yeah, from the beginning, it's been this really a thing. It's a topic that has a lot of depth to it, right? That's kind of what has kept my interest in it, and why I decided to build an educational business around exploring it, because that combination of using verbal tools and visual tools to, learn, solve problems, and share ideas. It's just like a never-ending pool of interesting things going on, and interesting applications too. There's all sorts of things that you can use this skill toward. And it's interesting. I had thought about for a while, I think the first time I thought about potentially making a course about building a course, it kind of becomes like a cliche thing a little bit. And the world of the internet and kind of making money online. And I kind of like shied away from even addressing things like that for a while, just because I don't know, maybe it's because there's a lot of people doing it, or because people can do it in shady ways on the internet. But the fact that like the starting point of it was this community, the verbal to visual community, and also the sketchnote community. I feel like people that are into sketchnotes, like get into it for the right reasons. So the idea of like teaching something like this, like how to build an online course and like hopefully make some money, maybe lots of money, doing it like within this community got me over that hurdle of even like addressing these topics. So I'm excited for that, and I'm excited to jump into it. Yeah, I think we're ready to move into part 2, but go ahead, Paul.
Just because this is live and I am here in Australia, and I know it's a stereotype, and I know it's not real for most people, even here in Australia, but out in the darkness, there were some noises. I am sitting outside at the moment, and there genuinely was this unusual noise, and a couple of kangaroos have I can't see them because it's dark, but I heard them jump in onto I don't have a front lawn, it's kind of the bush, and so it's the front yard, but they're just over the other side of the balcony there, and the thumping of them jumping through the bush and on the dry leaves just made me wonder what that was. But it's definitely a couple of kangaroos. I saw them yesterday morning out on our front yard area when I drove out, and they're back again this morning. So even in Australia, we don't travel to school or to work on them. We don't ride them, but they are right here in my front yard here this morning. A couple of kangaroos have joined us.
I love how like the biggest stereotype of what we think of when we think of Australia like came true. I kind of wish they would have like crept up behind you and like looked into the camera and be like, Paul, watch out. Watch out. I don't know, they're dangerous. That's great. And also a potential first drawing experiment, draw a kangaroo creeping up behind Paul. That's great. Well, once again, thank you, Raven and Paul, for joining us on this journey. Next time we'll get to hear from Joy as well on that same topic of what she's up to, how she got into sketchnoting, why she's interested in this journey here. But let's next kind of transition into part 2 of this first webinar, which is when I will kind of like introduce the first week's worth of work. And I think this kind of like 2-partness to each of these webinar conversations is going to be kind of a consistent format structure to each time we meet each week. Next time, we'll spend the first half kind of talking about how the work went in the previous week, kind of troubleshooting, talking about challenges, whatever kind of comes up. And then like the second half of next week is when I will introduce the work for week 2. So it'll kind of have that momentum going where we'll debrief the past week and then talk about the work for the next week. And I'm just excited to like go through this. And this is all like one big experiment because we haven't really done this before, which is fun. I like that. It takes some of the pressure off and there's an excitement there. And like part of that experiment piece for me is then like what I'm going to be doing in the second half of each webinar is kind of teaching live for the first time the curriculum that will then make it in a more polished version into the kind of final product of the course, build an online course with sketchnotes. So the things that I'm about to share are kind of, not quite, slightly past a rough draft, maybe a rough draft of kind of this curriculum. And I guess thank you to Raven and Paul and Joy for kind of being the guinea pigs here and putting up with the rough draft. And let's jump into it. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to be doing some image sharing on Slack. So one of the things that we have going here within the verbal to visual community, there's a Slack group with a handful of channels. That's kind of where we have ongoing conversations about visual note taking. That's where I share, links to the weekly webinars within the verbal to visual community. And we have a private Slack channel for the folks that are going through this journey. And that's where I will be sharing some photos, and that's where we'll be having some conversations, and I will be doing some screen sharing from Slack within this webinar. Just for a bit of background for folks that might not be familiar with Slack. First, I have to pull it up on my phone so that I can get the images up. Oh, there's one other thing. Before sharing any images, I wanted to share kind of the quick, rough outline of the first week / module of the course. So I'm kind of imagining this course to be like 12 modules long, which hopefully also kind of more or less lines up with 12 weeks long, so that like if you wanted to put a time to it and have kind of the motivation behind it to like get things done and not let it drag on, the idea is that each module is structured so that with a bit of energy, like time and energy each day, you can complete that module within a week. And to give folks an overview of what module 1 / week 1 looks like, as I just shared in Slack, it looks like this. So I'm going to share some visuals for each of these steps, but just so you know what the today kind of looks like. Lesson 1.1 will be about a course roadmap. So I'll kind of outline the entire 12 weeks of the course. 1.2 is going to be about brainstorming course topics, potential course topics. The third little lesson will be on how to go about selecting a course topic. And then the fourth will be about defining your audience and the transformation that you hope to create for your audience via the course. So I wanted to give a quick overview of that, just so you know kind of the topics that we're going to talk about today. And then what we're going to do now is go through each 4 of those. I'll share an image, talk about it a little bit, and then get feedback / have a conversation before we move on to the next piece. Looks like Raven had to step away for a bit, which is fine. She's pulling away, like kind of at work to participate in this. So no stress if people have to come and go a little bit throughout these webinars. Because, hey, I know a lot of people, and probably a lot of the people watching this too, are kind of like fitting this in alongside probably a full-time job, likely family and social obligations and all this. So I don't want people to feel stressed about taking care of those things.
And I think for me, Doug, that's part of the challenge and part of the, I think they call it sometimes the secret sauce of an experience like this that you're recording and you're creating, is that the reality is that often we see a finished final product. We look at the polish and we go, wow, that's amazing. But here we're going to be trudging through and some of the difficulties and the challenges and kind of working it out. And that's the reality. If I was just to look at the finished course, I'd think, man, I could never do that. But by being able to go back and review what we've been doing week by week, when like we're at week 1, module 1, and I'm thinking, gee, I got no idea. That's the reality perhaps for most people. So yes, fitting it around family, fitting it around the clock, fitting it around other commitments. I think that's the reality of how most people work these days, is something that we're interested in. Let's fit it in on the margins of life to see what we can produce in the end. So we're on a journey, and we'll see where we end up.
Absolutely. And there's an element too that you mentioned, and like already show your work. That idea of showing your work has come up today, and I think that's part of what these webinar conversations are about too. It falls in line. Like, we are literally showing the work of like going through kind of like building this course, because I am building it more or less on the fly as we have these conversations each week, and get to see the work that all of us put in week to week to build the course that we're building. And that does make it, I feel like it makes it more accessible, so that it, like you said, it's not just seeing this finished product. You get to see the unfiltered, sloppy, not unpolished things and work that goes into actually kind of making it and putting it together. And show your work is going to come back in again too, I think in week 2, in regards to showing your work around the development of the course itself, so that you're showing your work as you're building the course, so that by the time you launch it, there's people that might already be interested in it because of what you've been showing along the way. So to get to 1.1 here, first, the kind of course overview. I have 2 rough roadmaps, neither of which I'm happy with. So the final version, I'm sure, will look different than this. But the first vision here, what I have along the bottom of this kind of timeline here are the 4 stages that we'll be going through. Those 4 stages being first, defining your course, then preparing, and then producing your course materials, and then delivering them. So those 4 stages of define, prepare, produce, deliver. Those are kind of the 4 big picture stages. But then within each of those, what you'll see kind of working up, each of those is a single module or a single week, if we want to kind of stick with the timeline of it. Week 1 being about kind of the end goal, is defining the transformation that you'd like to create via your course. Week 2 will be about defining the delivery, how you actually plan to deliver your course materials, because there are a lot of options in terms of videos, photos, and text, like where you actually end up sharing it, some of the logistics behind that, just so you have an idea of how you'll be putting it out there, because that could inform some of the future steps there. Within the prepare stage, we will start by building a clothesline, and that refers to the clothesline method, which I've made a video about before, and I feel like comes up all the time within the Verbal to Visual community. Is an organizational tool for filling in the pieces of how you get from a starting point to an end point. In this case, it's like where are your students starting from, and then where do you want to get them, and how do you get them from point A to point B? So first you kind of have to build that, get the initial structure down, and then in week 4, then you actually have to fill it. You have to kind of fill out that clothesline. And that's those stages is where kind of a lot of the brainstorming and a lot of the research will go, as well as within kind of weeks 5, 6, and 7. After you have the rough structure of your clothesline and you filled it out a bit and are happy with all of that structure, then is when you jump into actually kind of drafting the lessons. And some of this structure here is a little bit loose, right? Like, so for those 3 weeks, weeks 5, 6, and 7, I kind of wanted to provide 3 weeks worth of time for the drafting of your lessons. And then just kind of breaking it down that way, of course, like 1 week you draft the first third, the next week you draft the second third, and the third week you draft the final third. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily have to like stick to that, but giving enough time to do that drafting of like, okay, what what visuals might I want to create for this lesson, and like what text do I want to be there. That drafting stage is kind of fun because it's low pressure, right? It's just initially getting the ideas down. And you have 3 weeks to do it. And from there, from that drafting stage in week 7, then we move on to producing. Right. So once you've drafted, you've got like all the pieces there, then you're ready to produce. And in a similar vein as the drafting, leaving three weeks to be able to break up the actual production. So this is where you would jump into, if you're making sketchnote videos, this is where you're actually creating those videos. You're recording them, you're editing them. If you're going with just kind of an image and text format, this is where you're doing kind of the more polished sketch notes, scanning them in, getting those final images ready. So 3 weeks for the production of all the course materials. And then in week 11 is when you actually like take all of those things that you've produced and put them into whatever educational environment that you're using to deliver the course. And we'll, talk about that in a bit in week 2, the options that are out there for delivering, whether it be an ebook form or a video course, lots of options out there for delivering the course materials. And it's in week 11 that you will kind of build that out. And then in week 12 is when you will launch it, get some feedback, and then kind of start improving it over time. So that's one way of organizing visually what this course looks like. I think in the next version, it will feel more like a roadmap and less like a weird stacked timeline, but hopefully that gives enough of an overview for kind of the stages that we'll be going through. I did share a second image on Slack if it ends up being more useful. Same information structured in a just week to week way. But for me, it was important to go from this roadmap, which just has week to week, to actually like defining these 4 primary stages. I felt like was a useful thing to outline. So that's why I created this. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, get comments, questions, feedback. Was there anything? So there's not yet a task yet, right? So lesson 1.1 is just a course overview to let you know what's going. Nothing that any of you have to do yet, but I do want to open it up if there are any questions or anything that's confusing about what I just shared.
I would say not confusing. In fact, it's helpful to get the overview. I would say daunting would be a word that comes to mind, just to realize that while we're going to kind of figure it out and work it out as we go, the reality is it's going to take some effort to come along on this journey and work this out. So it's again that the reality of fitting that in, and but I guess the goal is to have a finished product in the end that helps, that has an influence, that is significant and something we're proud of. So I guess that's, and I keep saying, Simon Sinek keeps talking about finding your why, and maybe that needs to come into it. Like, why do you want to do this in the first place? We've talked about it a little bit, but perhaps that's an important thing to reflect on some more. And look, it's way too early to be thinking about, is this one of many? Is this your one go at it? Is this you're only going to do it once and that's it? Not prepared to make any comment or statement about that at this stage, but that's something that I've got floating around in the back of my mind. Like, is this is my draft one as well, and going, oh, this is the first time I've done it. So it might be something about, wow, this is awesome. I'm going to produce 2 of these a year or something like that. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But daunted is how I feel right now. But excited.
I think I'm with you, Paul. The prepare stage, confession, mentally in my mind, I've broken that up into 2 steps just because all those blocks on top, it even like looks like a wall to me. They're like, oh, gotta get through this to get on the other side. I think in my notes, I'm going to break that up into like the clothesline section and then like the prepare section, because like each block I can look at, okay, there's 2 things we got to get through. Then there's only 2 more things, and there's only 3 things to get done with this. But for some reason, just visually, I guess this is the bad side of the coin of being a visual person. Like, it's like, oh, there's so much to do. And just trying to make it as achievable, and like the milestones get a little bit closer together will just help me, because it's hard for me to make it to the finish line. So I need those mile markers so I can just make it to the next mile marker each time.
No, I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I think that speaks to deficiency in like the way I presented that visual. And I think I like the idea of making the clothesline part kind of a separate stage from the drafting the lessons. So I think my initial thought is to create 5 stages instead of 4, precisely aligned with like what you just described, so that in between define and prepare, there's like brainstorming and research, or there's those weeks 2 and 3 that focus on the clothesline, to make that like a slightly smaller like milestone, as you mentioned, one smaller chunk to make it hopefully flow a bit better and feel less daunting.
Thank you. I know it's silly because it's still doing the exact same amount of work. Like, that hasn't changed at all. We're still doing all the steps.
But it's how you frame it too, which is like, here's our first opportunity to go a little bit meta with folks that will be developing their own course. Like, this is how you choose to like break it up and structure it, not just with the individual lessons, but with like the stages or the units, however you want to think about it, that can impact the kind of energy of the person coming into it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that as people who are visual learners and visual creators, what it looks like matters a lot, and how that appears changes how you feel about something, and that's obviously something that we need to remember, both how it feels for us as learners, but also when you're creating those things, it's good to be aware of how it might be perceived at the other end by the viewer, by the user. It's powerful how we depict things, how we create things, how we visually represent things really matters. And as you say, it can kind of develop momentum, or it can actually be like a wall, like a block or a potential block. So yeah, it's interesting just to be wary of that.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Thank you for the feedback and brief little conversation there about the roadmap, like already seeing ways to improve it, which I like. I am next getting an image for kind of like 1.2 brainstorming potential topics. Sharing that on Slack. And this is where we're starting to get to a little bit of like what Paul mentioned there in terms of reminding yourself of the why. One of the things that I wanted to provide an opportunity for within the first week, within the first module, first unit here, for those, like, I think there's probably going to be some variation. Some people might come into this already knowing like, oh, I know exactly what I want to make a course about. It's this, but other people might not have that coming in. So this next piece is an opportunity to explore like, well, what might you make a course about? And what this little tool here is just an opportunity to come up with a lot of ideas. So what this little kind of grid brainstorming template is, within the left-handed column there, going top to bottom, you can list out like all of your kind of major interests that you have and skills that you have. So those are kind of like left-hand side is like, what experience do you already like come to the table with? And then along the top are kind of causes that you care about. And causes might not be quite the right word, but we'll stick with it for now. So just, list out causes that you care about. Causes can be things like creativity, or faith, or they could be general, or they could be very specific. So you can use that term causes fairly broadly. But once you have like each of those listed out, then you can look at, okay, what happens if I combine this skill with this cause? What lives at that intersection? Or this interest with this other cause? What lives at each of those intersection points? So this is just a way to get a lot of different ideas down about potential topics to create a course around. And I think I'm already thinking like I might want to include other ways of brainstorming topics, but first I'll quickly open it up for and this would be like for those that are still trying to identify the topic for their course. This would be like task number 1 for the week that we're not gonna. So I think just from a standpoint of how these webinars are working, I don't think it's feasible to create, individual work time for the 2 or 3, 4 with me included, to actually do this work during the webinar. So it's more just like introducing the activities that you will complete throughout the next week. And then at the start of the next webinar is where we'll kind of share how those activities went. But in preparation for that work, completing this activity, any comments, questions, reactions to this template for brainstorming potential course topics?
I have not used this sort of brainstorming tool before, but I can see already how it has the potential to generate a whole stack of different ideas and different things to ponder. I like that. Soon, I would like us to do a little, can we just float around the causes that you care about? Some more examples of what that might be. The interests and skills, well, I'm interested and I've got those skills. I reckon I can work that out. But the causes that you care about, if you can just float around that a little bit, talk around that a little bit more, just to get me on the right track. But as I say, I've not used this, but I can see, it's exciting to. I haven't got the image in front of me, but where those two where they intersect is the generation of a whole new idea, and that's pretty cool. So that's one thing that I would like to discuss a bit more is that top line.
Yeah, I like that. Let me throw it to Raven first. If Raven happens to have any examples of her own for what those causes might be, either for you specifically, Raven, or just examples of causes.
I think I'm not exactly what you were looking for, because when I think about the interest, like I feel like education is going to be the name of the intersection. Like we want to teach people and the intersection. So, but like if I looked at sermon sketch notes, like sketching in church, the cause I would care about would be like more like simplicity and ease and confidence, which I guess would be more characteristics of the course that I would or I guess the framing of it, because there are other places where you can learn to doodle, but the framing that I want to do it is like, let's make it fast and easy. Instead of making it like a super complex thing for church people. But I'm not sure if that's what you were going for. But anyway, I just want to say that this graph excites me because I like the idea of like marrying the things and seeing where they intersect and what they form and stuff. It almost feels like playing with paper dolls. Like, oh, I get to mix and match outfits and see what's going to happen. So, and I've never heard it delivered in that way before. So I'm really excited. I really like the chart. It's so much more fun than like just listing things and drawing lines in between them. So, yeah.
Cool. I'm glad that there's some excitement there. Paul, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just I guess Raven probably just put it in words a little bit better than me about that chart is good, because my instant thing about brainstorming would be that, you know, that kind of the bubble here and then some lines leading off it, and that kind of stimulates this idea and that idea, and I probably will still do that. But what I think this chart does is it actually I'm going to work out what the things on the top are. I'm going to work out what the things on the side are. But for me, the things where they intersect is the new idea. That's the new concept. That's the new thing that I wouldn't have thought about if I was just following one line. And so, yeah, I've not done this before. And yeah, it's something that I'd get up early in the morning to do.
Nice. Glad to hear that. And in some ways, like I'm thinking about now, like the courses that I've chosen to do and like what would be the cause and like the skill, and even like the course that I'm thinking about, learn a new language with sketch notes. Like the interest and skill would be sketchnoting. I guess it could be like sketchnoting and language learning. The cause is something more like cross-cultural appreciation, or yeah, there's something a little bit deeper to what that cause would be. But I didn't like necessarily, that's not necessarily how I came up with the idea. It's kind of just like doing it in reverse, like and which is to say that like it might be okay to do it that way as well, right? Like you might have a thing that you want to teach, and part of like even mentioning that layer of like cause that you want to contribute to, even if that does come after the fact, that's kind of like identifying what's the, yeah, you have this interest in skill, that this thing that you want to teach, what's like the bigger picture why behind it. So that might be another layer to the cause, but only if you're doing it after the fact. So yeah, still there's a little bit of vagueness there that I'm feeling, but hopefully that gets folks started on generating ideas for things that they would like to teach. With that, let's move to the next lesson here. So for this next piece, it's once you've had the opportunity to brainstorm a handful of topics, potential topics for your course, this is a way to go about actually selecting a course topic. And it looks a bit like this. So with this piece here, it's like, okay, how do you go about evaluating whether the thing you have in mind is a good course topic to go with or not. And I like to think of this kind of like past, present, future perspective, and kind of 3 questions to ask yourself. And, if you check all 3 off, then I'd say, yeah, that's a good course to go with. So the one related to the past here is like some experience. Notice I don't say like a ton of experience, because so long as you have, logged some hours with the thing, with that topic, you already have a certain level of knowledge and experience that someone who doesn't have that could benefit from. There are lessons that you've learned that could be helpful for others. And to some degree too, I think that there is some benefit to being like not too far away from when you first explored that topic, because you remember what it was like to be a beginner. And that can be the hardest thing when teaching something that you have a lot of experience with, is that you kind of have forgotten the perspective of what it was like to learn that for the first time. So that's why I say some experience there. And then in the present, like, what's your level of interest? Hopefully you have lots of interests, because to spend the 12 weeks or however long it takes you to go through this process of creating and delivering an online course, you're going to be spending enough time with this idea, exploring this topic, that you're going to want to have lots of interests. That's kind of going to be the best way to be able to put in the work, as daunting as it might feel right now. So hopefully, you're super excited to explore this topic further in the present, and then looking to the future. Is the topic of that course, is that in alignment with your long-term plans? So having some sense of, I use this story from Neil Gaiman about kind of defining your mountain. Where is it that you're going? And then kind of evaluating the decisions that you make. Like, does this get me closer to my mountain or farther from it? Does the topic of this course fit well with where you want to take your life in the next 1 to 5 to 10 years? And it's obviously okay if there's some uncertainty there. None of us know exactly what's going to happen in the future, but having an idea of whether or not the topic that you choose fits in with where you'd like to be headed, I think is a useful perspective to have in mind. And you could even kind of like, if you have 5 or 6 course topics that you're interested in, you could even, kind of like rate from 0 to 10 each of these 3 pieces, just if you wanted to get like a little bit of numerical value. And then, picking the topics that have the highest total is one way to go about making that decision. So that is one framework for going about the process of selecting a course topic. I will open it up now to questions or comments, reactions to that process for evaluating potential course topics and ultimately selecting one.
I think for me, it's why I like to keep in mind the possibility that this is my first course that I'm going to create and not the only. Mm-hmm. And it almost makes me think, well, if I can work out really where my life is going and what's up that mountain, not doing that first big thing with my first one, like kind of really use this one as one I'm going to learn about and kind of fumble my way through. And it might actually be something that I'm so excited about that after I've done it, and maybe I've done a few other courses or created a few other courses, that I'm going to come back to this one when I'm better at doing it. Because I think that it, presumably we could get better at creating courses as we do it. It's a little bit like recording your first podcast, people who sort of say, when they go back and listen to early episodes, and Doug, you might even be in this experience, you could go back to some of the first things that you've created that you've learnt along the way. You're in a different place and a different ability and all of that than what you were when you first started. And so I just have to remember that I don't have to get it right. Even in terms of what I choose, it doesn't have to be the only time I have a crack at this. So therefore, I think the choice of topic ought to start with something that I'm really excited about and passionate about and ready to spend this amount of time dancing with. Because it might well be that I come back and dance again another time, because what I'm able to produce this time may not be the final version. It will be for a period of time, but I might get better at it, and so I want to come back to it. So therefore, what I'm going to work on needs to be something I'm happy to spend time with.
I like that perspective. Any thoughts or comments to add as well, Raven?
I think I've been spoiled by the Verbal to Visual like weekly meetings where we just talk about one single aspect, because I feel like already I'm like, man, this is so much. Oh my gosh. And so I love it because it feels really meaty. And I love that, but it's also given me, because our whole thing is about creating our own course of like the pacing of like, when we do our videos, it makes more sense to me now of when I took Verbal to Visual, of all the pauses and breaks you had that give us time to go and do the thing you just discussed, and then come back to the video and do the thing you just discussed. Because I think in the process of creating anything that we're going to charge for, we want to make sure the value is actually there. And this is showing me how much value you can put into a short amount of time, but you can also still break it up. And it's just the way that, like, I guess, I don't know, when you're teaching, the time you have to give for things for the concept to be grasped, and then to execute on it, and then come back to the next step, is really cool. This, phones just keep ringing. I want to concentrate. Okay. I really enjoy the past, present, future, and even this the sketch note. I'm seeing the power in the videos where I see you actually draw it out as you're talking, because hearing it and looking at everything on the page, like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so much. This is so much. And so that is kind of like making me even more want to build a lesson with sketch notes in it, because you can show physically, I guess, or you can, I don't know, figuratively, literally, one of those words, you can show how the ideas actually stack on each other as we draw a complete picture by putting the elements together. But okay, so the actual stuff that was in the note that you just talked about, I really like the different ways you can look at it, like as far as past, present, future. In the past, some experience. In the present, are you excited about it? And in the future, does it align with your goals? And I really like having the concrete guideline to kind of go along, because brainstorming will kick up a whole lot of dust. And like, while we're trying to get focused and move forward, sometimes brainstorming moves us backwards because we get too many ideas. And I like the chance to evaluate the ideas and have something to evaluate them against.
Nice. I like those comments there too. And I agree that there's a little bit of a convoluted nature to the way that, like, introducing, like 4 lessons at once and introducing the activities, but not giving time to actually do the activities. How, just the way in which that affects the delivery with like this within this format. And I'm almost thinking like, would it be better for me to just like on my own record the same types of things that I just shared in this informal format, but then kind of like release those with us here within this group throughout the week, so that you still have a chance to do that, like take one lesson at a time and then like act on the lesson before the next one comes in. So I'm going to think about that as a potential tweak to how we do things here within this first path through this thing, doing it live.
And one of the things to observe and feel is that we have the privilege of being in the moment, and we can ask questions. We can ask for that clarity. Whereas if you were to release them as little standalone modules where you just deliver something, which ultimately is how a course ends up being delivered, there isn't that opportunity. If it's a make it once and let it roll, that form of course, then there isn't that opportunity for your students, for the people who are trying to work their way through the course, to have that clarifying conversation, which is what we're able to do here. So potentially, we're hopefully we're asking the questions that students further down the line would also have, and therefore by us asking them, you as the teacher are able to try and tackle them and answer them. And but it just again reminds us of how important a teacher is, being in the classroom and having that dialogue with your teacher, whether it's a classroom online like this or whether it's face to face. That teacher is still important, and their perspective and their thoughts and their clarification is critical to the learning journey, I think.
Yeah, I like that aspect of what we're able to do here, having those clarifying conversations. And to point to one of the things that I enjoy about creating online courses is that even after you've created a thing and you've put it out there, you have all these lessons, you can continue to get feedback and address questions that come up. Like even if, like in the case of the type of courses that I make, where I put a lot of time into making a sketchnoted video lesson, but then I realize I'm getting this like same question a lot within, that lesson module webpage, I have the full opportunity to like right below that video lesson, like here's a common question that comes up for people after watching this, and here's my take on it, here's my thought on it. So the ability to continually improve your online course over time, for me, that takes away a lot of the pressure about getting it like perfect the first time through. So that's just something to keep in mind for folks that are creating these courses as well. There's that opportunity to address those questions after the fact, so that hopefully, for each new person that comes on, they've benefited from the previous people that have gone through it. And like, it's just a way to improve the experience over time.
It's fun for me too in the community. When I was going through the initial verbal to visual, to ask questions, and then that week to see on the YouTube channel and say, I got a question, let's deal with it. And I'm like, yay!
Yeah, there was this period of time that I hope to get back to where I was making videos much more frequently, and I was able to like take a question from the previous week that had come up in the community and like, ooh, think about it, brainstorm around it, make a video about it. So that was fun. One last idea to share for today. So presumably you've now gone through the process of brainstorming potential course topics. Then you evaluated those and actually picked one. So you have a topic for your course. Now is the challenge of identifying, okay, who are you making your course for, and what's the transformation that you are going to create via your course? So Share this visual on the screen here. So this then is kind of the last lesson, last part of the first week of work, first lesson here, first unit, I guess. Who is it that you're going to make your thing for? And there's kind of two different ways that you can think about, identifying your intended audience: demographics and psychographics. So demographics being like, what's their age, what's their location, kind of like biographical information there. But then psychographics is more things like, okay, what are their interests? What are they interested in? What's their personality like? And like for me, when I think about the audience of Verbal to Visual, I don't really think about demographics at all. I only think about psychographics, and specifically this intersection of lifelong learners and lifelong makers. If like folks live at that intersection, then I think they're going to be interested in sketchnoting. Like that's who I'm making things for. So that's something for you to think about. Who is the audience that you want to make your course for? And then what's the specific transformation that you want to carry that group of people through? Kind of what's the starting point? And then where would you like to take them by the end of your course? They're kind of like big questions. And I feel like and this might be true of the previous things that we've talked about today. I feel like all I am doing right now is kind of outlining the big questions, but not giving enough kind of like supporting prompts to answer them. So I'm going to do some thinking about how to like bring that to these two pieces in particular, but even just recognizing these as kind of the next steps to take on, identifying who your intended audience is, and then also like defining the specific transformation that you'd like to take that audience throughout your course. Questions or comments related to this last step? And I know we're over the hour. Thanks for sticking around. If you have to take off, don't worry about that. Go ahead and get to it. But I'll open the mic, hand it over to Raven, it looks like, for some thoughts.
Thank you for using Verbal to Visual as a case study on choosing psychographics over demographics, because a lot of the things that are out there that tell you to like define your audience, you have to make this like ideal customer avatar, and it starts with demographics, not with psychographics. And so this is the first time I'm hearing this, and I've like watched a ton of webinars trying to figure this stuff out, and all of them always start with demographics. But I think it makes sense in that demographics used to play a big role in what we were exposed to in life, and then that would shape our interests. But now with the internet and everything, we can be exposed to much more. So it is much more a psychographic thing than a demographic thing. And that's my mind-blowing thing. I'm surprised that I had mine left to blow after everything else, but that was pretty awesome.
Well, hey, you just kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I hadn't even made that connection of like the fact that so much more is driven by psychographics because of what people have access to via the internet. I kind of just focused on psychographics because it like, in some way it felt easier and like I could identify it better. So I was like, I'm not going to worry about demographics. I'll like figure that out over time by like paying attention to who actually shows up. So it was kind of like out of laziness to some degree that I chose psychographics. But I think that there's something to what you said about that being the more important factor these days in terms of what you're creating for people. Didn't mean to interrupt though. Any other thoughts or comments to share, Raven?
No, I'm just really happy. This is a lot, and I really feel like you did one of those things where they tell you to under promise and over deliver instead of the other way around. And so that's what this course is really feeling like so far. And it's almost feeling like one of those webinars where they give you all the information really, really fast. They give you the how, but they don't, or the why and not the how. And so you pay for the how. But you want to, because they've done such a good, thorough job of explaining the why. And so I feel like everything you're saying, like I'm getting the meat on why it's important to go through these steps. The how, I think I just need time to process it. But the whys behind why we're doing all of these steps make a ton of sense. And it's just like, yes, yes. So I feel like I should have some kind of like certificate when I'm done with all of this, because I feel like I'm going to know a lot. But yeah.
Well, I feel like too, what my job is now, I think, to deliver, I guess, the best educational experience and ultimately like the best product in a course is to provide more of that how, provide more structure on the how piece. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about after our conversation here, because I like how you said, like, under promise but over deliver, but don't overwhelm. It's like, it's okay to under promise and over deliver, but avoid like overwhelming. And I feel a little bit like I'm too much in that overwhelming business right now, which is where, helpful pieces related to the how, I think, are what I need to add to this experience. Paul, thoughts on this last piece?
For me, it actually lines up with what you did at the beginning of today when you gave the course roadmap. In terms of trying to work out, okay, where are we now and where are we going to go? Where are you taking us? So in terms of a course development, I think starting with this is where we are, this is the things that we're going to do, and we're going to end up here, is an important part of laying it out right at the beginning, which is what you did in 1.1. And so that defining the transformation is partly trying to imagine, as a result of this course, if you follow my course, then this is sort of where I think you're at, and this is where I'm going to try and get you to. And I think that's a helpful thing, and you've demonstrated that. And the other thing I like about what you've done for us today is I don't know where I'm going to take them until I've worked out what my theme is or what my topic is or whatever. So I've got to do kind of 1.2 before I can think about 1.4. And I've got to do 1.3 in between those two. So the structure of it, the order of it makes sense and clearly, because you've thought that through, and I can see how I don't need to worry so much about 1.4 yet, because I haven't even worked out 1.2. I've got to do that first. So that's good. I can see that kind of that flow makes sense to me. Yeah, I've got another question for another little bit, but if there's an opportunity at the end for questions. But yeah, on this 1.4 bit, I feel good about that.
Great. And I think another thing that like Paul reiterated there is the benefit, in the final version of a course, that there is a lot of benefit to, this drip model of you kind of see one piece at a time and get to do something with that piece before you move on to the next piece. So yeah, I think there are advantages and disadvantages to seeing the full, scope of unit 1 here before, and then having to go back and actually do the work of 1.2. So it's kind of like, okay, it's nice to see everything that we're doing in this first unit. But in some ways, maybe it would have been nicer to like be able to respond to 1.2 before seeing what's coming in 1.3 and 1.4, just in terms of like what the mind has to focus on at any given time, like how much it has to keep in mind. So that's just another thing, I guess, to think about as folks are developing their own courses, is how much you choose to lay out at any given time about kind of where you're going and where you kind of like cut it off and ask folks to do something before you reveal the next piece. So yeah, something to think about there. Paul, you said you had a question.
Am I still on? You can hear me?
Yeah, you're still on.
Just my question is probably to Raven, is how are you going to manage the hardware, the bits of paper? Are you in one sketchbook? Are you going to have loose bits of paper all over the place and a couple of post-it notes and a couple of those index cards? Are you going to try and keep it all in one spot? Are you putting it in a bag and just going to pull that bag out when it's time to do this? Just the logistics of the how do you kind of pull it all together and somehow keep it together so that next time you want to enter this space and this idea, where are you going to go and find where you've put it all last time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm going to put it all on my verbal to visual log and hashtag it in the log. So like the notes I'm taking today, or maybe I'll instead of verbal to visual, well, I'll just put it inside this online course channel and hashtag it Raven course or something, so it doesn't interfere with everybody else's. That way, everybody in this, you and Joy and Doug can see what I'm working on as I'm working on. And that way, if I'm about to go off a cliff, one of y'all can be like, hey. But also because I can tell you I want to use one notebook, and this is a notebook I bought, but I'm sure there's going to be times where, like, especially when we start doing the clothesline, where I want to pull out Post-it notes or note cards, and I'm going to take a photo of it and then make sure I put it inside of Slack. So I'll have a digital one place so my analog can be all over the place, because analog speaking, I do use a lot of different mediums. And so I just got to be real with myself. I'm going to have to make a digital one place.
I really like that, a digital one place. That makes sense. And I wonder, Doug, if it helps you, that would motivate me to do it. Maybe I need to make Slack in this, create a course. I don't even know the terminology for it, but down this little stream, if I hashtag Paul, whatever that means, that I can keep my stuff in one spot, but other people in this group have access to it, and then you can pull on it if you need to, or whatever. I suppose that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I like that you're both thinking about that, and I even have what hopefully is a simpler solution, and it's a good time to like bring this up anyway. I like the idea of you each using your own progress log, because what I want to do is, since like it was kind of a hard decision to like figure out how to get the four of us, try to select like, okay, who's going to be a part of this initial crew that's part of these webinars and ongoing. Because as we talked about in previous verbal to visual webinars, there's kind of like a sweet spot of having enough people to be able to follow the journey and get different perspectives, but not so much that turns it into like a 3-hour webinar instead of like an 1.5 hour webinar for this first one. So, which is all to say that like right after, and I think I'll do this tomorrow morning, but if this is okay with you all, I want to share these webinars within a public Slack channel within the verbal to visual community, because this whole idea came from our verbal to visual community. I want anybody that's a part of that community to be able to see these conversations like right away, right as they happen. And then like anybody that signs up for this course, the course Build an Online Course with Sketchnoting, they'll get to see these too, but to be able to share them earlier than that with the verbal to visual community. And then like, for other folks that weren't able to be a part of this group, they can still watch and participate. And if they want, kind of follow along with us in real time, and share their comments and like the same responses to all these things that we talked about, which would also make it more reasonable for anybody within the verbal to visual community to share their work in their progress log within Slack. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. And yes, from my perspective, yes, I think we should be able to share it out with kind of a selected group. So with those within the verbal to visual community, just on the, perhaps I need to go and do a quick course on how to use Slack better. Like within the progress log, Raven, you talked about hashtagging, or do we not need to if we're going to use our own progress log that Doug has already set up for us?
I said hashtags just so I can go back and search my own channel to find things specific to the note course, or the not note course, the the how to build with sketch notes course. I minimized it myself and confused myself. Like you can go back and search, like I could search your log for like you talking about podcast, or I can search all of verbal to visual Slack for people mentioning podcasts. But so if I intentionally make a little mark every time I talk about the course, which I'm saying is a hashtag, then I can search verbal to visual or my sermon, I can search my log and find just the things that are relevant to this course instead of pulling up like everything that we do and all the other Friday webinars and stuff and all that kind of stuff without needing another channel.
Okay. So the hashtag is just a call sign, and then whatever the word is next, as long as you're consistent with that word, that's what you would search. So if you said hashtag, like, do you need to put hashtag, or do you just go online course, for example, on PJ's online course, then I search that and I'll find that within my own progress?
Yeah, you do for within Slack, you can just like type those words like PJ course, because what's kind of not weird, but one of the things about Slack is that the hashtag symbol, the numeral symbol, is how they identify channels. So if you start to do hashtag something within Slack, it'll try to find the channel that you're trying to mention. So it's like you can't really hashtag within Slack, but as long as you just like write that, you can put it in parentheses or in brackets or, something. You could create your own tag just by using that same word or set of characters, PJ course, in each of the posts related to building an online course.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. And then you can search it. I see the value in doing that, especially if, like Raven does, she shares lots of things in her Raven's log. And so it could get messy, but this is a way to kind of clean it up a little bit for a particular purpose. Okay, that makes sense. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And we'll kind of start to wrap it up here. Sorry for going longer than intended. What's left then between this week and next is to spend some time doing the work that we mentioned. So if you haven't yet, brainstorming potential course topics, and then going about and actually selecting a single topic for your course, and then defining your audience and the transformation. Those are the three things to spend some time on this week. What we'll be doing next week is you'll get to share out how that went and bring any challenges or questions related to those tasks after you've had a chance to dig into them. You can bring that in next week. You can also feel free to, as you're sharing on your progress log within Slack, you can share your work and ask a question there. So there can also be some dialogue going on throughout the week. And then at the start of the next webinar, we'll kind of hit the most interesting points again, have an opportunity to ask questions and have some discussion around these things again. And then we'll jump into week 2 after that. How does that sound?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. So, all right. I'm not sure I can make it next week, but I'm going to try to rearrange some stuff so I can. Time zone stuff be messing me up.
Yeah, that's tricky. And as I mentioned, if folks need to miss a week here or there, that's no problem. We'll catch up when we can. Great. Well, thanks y'all for hanging out for an hour and a half. I appreciate this very first one in particular, and we'll keep it going. Keep making progress week after week. Thanks for folks that watch this replay all the way to the end too. I'm excited to keep this going and see what y'all make.
One thing I'm going to have to remember is, they say it's darkest just before dawn. I reckon it's coldest just before dawn too, because the temperature has dropped and it's getting chillier out here. It's colder now than when I started an hour and a half ago.
I noticed it. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, like in Paul's thumbnail. I was like, oh, he's having to put a jacket on now. I feel bad that I kept Paul outside for so long. Well, now you get to go inside and warm up.
That's right. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be good.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to stop the broadcast.